The United States, a nation defined by its founding ideals of liberty and union, stands today at a crossroads for centuries. Over race, class, politics, and identity have played out in legislatures, courtrooms, and streets. But some historians, political scientists, and even military strategists now ask an unsettling question. What if the tensions we see today spiral into a second American Civil War? To understand this possibility, we must first examine how such a crisis could begin. The seeds of conflict rarely sprout overnight. They grow quietly in the soil of mistrust today. America is more politically polarized than at any time since the 1860 surveys show that majorities in both parties view the other not simply as rivals, but as threats to the nation's survival. Political violence, once considered unthinkable, has already broken into the mainstream. Economic divides deepen the fracture. The gap between wealthy and working Americans has widened dramatically. Strip of industry a Boxer in the past. Such divides have been fertile ground for populist movements, uprisings, and even secessionist talk. Then there are the stresses of climate and crisis disasters, whether natural or man-made, test the resilience of governments. As storms intensify, as infrastructure fails, as trust in institutions declines, citizens turn not to Washington for help, but to local leaders, militias, or even extremist groups who promise protection. History shows us the pattern. The American Civil War of the 1860s began not as a sudden explosion, but as a steady unraveling. Years of distrust, broken compromises, and regional self-interest pulling the fabric of the Union apart. More recent conflicts abroad, in Yugoslavia or Syria, remind us that modern societies, even educated, developed democratic ones, are not immune to collapse when trust between people and government vanishes. The culture wars accelerate this unraveling. Questions over guns, reproductive rights, race, and religion are no longer just policy disputes. They are battles over identity, over who counts as an American and who holds power. When citizens stop believing that ballots resolve disputes, they begin to believe only force can. And here lies the critical turning point. Civil wars do not begin with grand declarations or clear lines on a map. They begin with neighbors distrusting neighbors, with armed groups patrolling streets, with governments unable or unwilling to enforce laws fairly. The descent into conflict is slow, almost invisible at first, until it is undeniable. Already, small signs flicker. Militia groups have grown in size and confidence. Public faith in elections, once the founded on American democracy, has eroded. Half the population doubts the legitimacy of outcomes they disagree with. In such a climate, a single spark, an election disputed, a violent incident amplified by media, or an economic collapse could ignite a chain reaction. If such a spark were to come, the question would not be if violence erupts, but how far it spreads. At the heart of America's fracture lies a force as old as civilization itself: corruption. When leaders put personal gain above public service, when money shapes policy more than the will of the people, trust begins to erode. Citizens no longer believe their voices matter. They look instead to extremes, to movements that promise purity, honesty, or revenge. Corruption does not always appear as briefcases of cash or blatant fraud. It is more often systemic, revolving doors between corporations and government, laws written by lobbyists and policies that serve the powerful few while leaving millions behind. In such an environment, frustration becomes fuel, and polarization becomes inevitable. On the left, anger over inequality, racial injustice, and climate collapse drives calls for sweeping change. Sometimes radical, sometimes revolutionary. On the right, fears of cultural loss, government overreach, and shifting demographics spark demands for restoration of tradition, of borders, of a vanished America. Each side believes its agenda is a defense of freedom. Each side believes it is merely protecting what is rightfully theirs. But in pushing further outward, they create what scholars call counter-polarization. When one extreme justifies the rise of the other, the harder one side pulls, the harder the other resists. And here lies the paradox of freedom in believing we have the right to push our vision as far as possible. We forget that others feel threatened when their values, traditions, or identities are dismissed. What one side sees as liberation, the other experiences as erasure. In history, this tension has often been the spark. In Weimar Germany, in the Balkans of the 1990s, in the United States of the 1850s, unchecked ignited conflict. The logic is tragically simple. When people believe their opponents are not just wrong, but dangerous, compromise dies. And when compromise dies, democracy itself falters. The consequences follow swiftly: violence at protests, local leaders pressured to take sides, governments paralyzed by gridlock, and behind the curtain, bad actors, opportunists, demagogues, corrupt officials thrive in the chaos. For a divided nation is far easier to control than a united one. But history also offers another lesson. Division is not destiny. The spiral of conflict can be slowed, even reversed, if citizens learn to see not just what divides them, but what binds them. The first step is acceptance, the recognition that disagreement does not equal destruction. The second is understanding, listening to the fears and values of others, not to surrender, but to acknowledge. Because behind every ideology lies a human story, a fear of loss, a hope for dignity, a desire for belonging. Corruption, too, must be confronted. Leaders who exploit division for personal gain must be held accountable. Transparency, civic education, and the protection of democratic norms are not luxuries. They are the guardrails of peace. The truth is simple.
A balanced nation cannot be easily controlled. A divided one can. That is why division is always the tool of bad actors, and why unity, however difficult, is the greatest defense. If America is to step back from the brink, it will not be through victory of one side over another. It will be through recognition that no citizen, no community, and no belief exist in isolation. The strength of a republic is not in silencing its differences, but in learning to live with them.